When Nerissa awoke, gnarled branches wound around her arms and legs, and a tree trunk blocked her bedroom door. "Mama!" she cried, but no answer came. Vines clung to her walls, knocking aside the dream-sweet charm her mother had hung. The world was deathly still. She struggled against the branches and found them pliable. Wriggling free in the sunlight filtering through her window, she gazed about. The trunk seemed larger than the width of her door. Indeed, it grew through the wall and curved, swallowing the house with its massive bark. She'd not be able to leave that way, and she feared for her parents' lives. Nerissa rushed to her second-story window. A forest had grown around her and her neighbors' houses. Thick branches punched through the sturdy roofs, and silence roared in her ears. Her neighbor, a widow, should have been out feeding her chickens, but instead, ugly roots had broken the coops and the birds were missing. On the other side, her neighbor's children should have been breakfasting, laughter floating from their kitchen, but stillness greeted her. The merry sound of neighborly chatter, the creak of wagon wheels, the lowing of cattle, and the barking of dogs, all was missing. "The time for the Dryads is nigh," her father had told Nerissa on nights she wanted a frightening story, and her mother had chastised him for scaring a 10-year-old. The long-ago fear seemed minuscule compared to the noiselessness. Was it true? Had the Dryads come? If so, where were they? A weathered tree had grown next to her house, so Nerissa clambered onto the branches. It sloped gently, allowing her to shimmy down. On the ground, carpeted in lush grass different from the thin blades she knew, she stepped back to survey the damage. The tree, centered on her parents' bedroom, grew tall above the house and disappeared overhead. Trees also grew through all the other houses in their village. Tears leapt to Nerissa's eyes, and the death-like quiet made her shiver. The next hamlet was almost a day's walk away, and Nerissa knew not what to do but to go toward it. She set out, wishing for shoes, but she'd cast them off after dinner, and the kitchen under her parents' bedroom was gone. She refused to linger over the damage done to her house, but instead resolutely turned and walked away. As she made her way through the hushed forest, winding around trees and stepping over roots, Nerissa grew conscious that something was watching. She turned to look but found no one. The silence told her she was the only person alive. What about the animals? Where were the birds chirping, the squirrels playing, the deer roaming? "Child," said a voice. Relieved that someone had survived the forest's incursion, she smiled, but instead of a neighbor stepping forward, a face appeared in a tree trunk. Nerissa screamed and ran, legs pumping, clawed branches snagging her night clothes. She tripped, sprawled, and pushed herself up. Before she could run again, the nearest tree's bark twisted and eyes popped open. Nerissa cowered. "Be calm and listen," said the tree. "I have spared you for a reason." She lifted her head, curious, but her heart pounded. "Your people forgot, but the forest didn't. Do you remember?" The echo of the tree's words whispered with a breeze. Fearing the touch of the unnatural wind, she shook her head. "What do you mean? What do you want me to remember?" "Think back, girl," the wind echoed its words. "Think back to your mother's memories and her mother's memories and her mother's memories. Do you remember?" How could she remember her great-grandmother's memories? This tree, impossibly speaking, was talking nonsense. "Please, what happened to my parents? Are they alive?" "I have taken them. They are part of me now." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Mama, Papa, I'm so scared." Branches reached for her, but before she could scurry away, they grabbed her by the arms and shook. "Stop it!" She tried to escape, but the grip was vice-like. She struggled, pounding its rough branches, but succeeded only in scraping her hands and wrists. Blinking away tears, she looked back into the tree's face. It squeezed her arm, its eyes glaring. "The time for the Dryads is nigh." This time it echoed not only in the wind, but in her memory. Her grandfather's story had told of a time when Dryads had frolicked and played. They'd tended trees, stolen babies to raise as their own, lured children from their mothers, and cast magic spells to bewitch young men and women. She'd been frightened, not wanting to leave her parents' home to live with the Dryads, but that remembered fear was nothing compared to the knowledge now that the forest had come for her. "Soon you will have a companion." The tree released its hold. "Stay in the protection of the woods and I will bring him to you." Its face dissolved, the eyes closing, the lips pursing, and the thick brows melting. "No, wait!" She leapt to her feet. "What do you mean? What companion?" Only bark remained. The voice was gone, the wind still, the timber returned to its former silence. Fearful now for the neighboring village's safety, Nerissa increased her pace, dodging branches branches and hopping over roots. She tried to recall her great-grandmother's memories, as the tree had demanded, but it was impossible. Her earliest memory was playing a game in their yard with her father, a silly thing with a ball and stick. Nothing existed before then. When she came to the tree line, twilight had fallen. At the tall grass delineating forest from meadow, she stopped. Across the field was the village she sought. Lights glowed in windows, shadows moved against walls. The wind brushed her, whispering, "Don't go, Nerissa." She hesitated. Though she'd been frightened earlier, the face in the tree had promised her a companion. But the villagers should be warned, shouldn't they? Still, it was late, and she didn't want to disturb them. Nerissa stepped back inside. "I'll just rest for the night." A breeze rustled the leaves. When she woke, she discovered a mound, soft as a pillow, had grown under her head. A carpeting of leaves covered her, keeping the chill away, and a bush with berries blossomed beside her. Ravenous, she hesitated for only a moment before devouring them, finding them more delicious than any other food she had ever eaten. Her hunger sated, Nerissa could delay no longer. Fearful for what she would find, she peered out. The village still stood. Perhaps it was a sign she could help them escape their fate. She would tell them to pack their belongings and leave before the forest took them too. She stepped from the trees and hurried across the meadow. Soon the sun made her sweat, and the breezeless plain made her itch. Nerissa wanted to turn and run back into the woods, but she forced herself onward. A villager spotted her and came toward her. His face was tanned, and he wore homespun clothing, which reminded her of her father. She tried to move quicker, but found her arms and legs growing heavy. "What's happening to me?" Horrified, Nerissa saw that her skin was turning brown. Not the sun-beaten brown of the man approaching, but the brown of bark. She put her hand to her face and felt roughness under her fingers. "No!" Her pace was slowing. With monumental effort, she made one more step, but could make no more. The man had stopped and was now gawking at her. Other villagers had come from their homes and were staring at her with terrified looks. Nerissa was immobile, but her vision was rising. She surged above doorways and then second-story windows and then roofs. She tried to fight and kick, but failed. Finally, as she peered down at the assembled villagers, a familiar voice spoke from below. "The time for the Dryads is nigh," said the tree. Her body was rooted to the ground, and her arms and legs had turned into branches. She was now an oak tree towering over the village. "I destroyed your brethren in the neighboring village," continued the tree. "I tested this young one and found her wanting. She doesn't remember what it means to be a Dryad. If she had, she couldn't have left me. Now she's part of the forest. Do not reject your heritage as she did. Your ancestors forgot. You forgot. But the trees must have their caretakers. We have waited long enough. By tomorrow eve, you must return to the forest and learn how to live in it anew, or you will meet the same fate." A cry swept through the villagers, but Nerissa barely heard. As the tree's speech ended, her vision grew darker and darker until it faded into blackness.